I've been asked to describe how I obtained the document style I use in my clickable calculus demos and even in the study guides I've written. Well, here is the exposition of that style and how it's implemented. Now, make use of this clickable calculus table of contents to illustrate relevant features. The first thing that you would notice here would be the use of sections. These sections open, and I use the section boundary. The reason why I want the section boundary visible is because if I click anywhere on that section boundary, the section collapses. Now, it is possible to turn that section boundary off. It's even possible to hide the triangle. If you right-click, well, I'm in Windows, so I have a 2-button mouse, but there is an equivalent in other operating systems. If you select Section, Hide Arrow, and Stay Expanded, you'll notice that the section boundary and the triangle disappear, but they reappear if you hover over it. So I'm going to restore that. To remove the section boundary completely, one way to do that is to go to the View menu, Show Hide Contents, and you see here Section Boundaries. Now if you turn that off, you turn off globally the section boundary, and you don't get it back by hovering over it. So now, in order to close this section, I would have to scroll back to the triangle if I had moved down in that section. So I like to leave that visible. So I'm going to restore that. View, Show Hide Contents. I'm going to return that, and I always leave that visible because often I will close the section by simply clicking on that boundary. The next thing that you would see here is in the section there is a table. Now, the only way that you can position material on the screen is by encasing bits of material in the cells of a table. You cannot just randomly move stuff around the screen in a document if you don't use a table. So it is essential that the table be understood completely. And so that's the next thing I want to talk about, is the table. So how do you insert a table? It's the Insert menu, Table. Insert menu, Table. This is the Insert Table dialog, and I have a screen capture of it here so you can see what it looks like. The default number of rows is 3, the default number of columns is 2. So I'm going to put that in. I'll put it in here. Insert table. Okay, now you'll notice that the position has two options. After the block, so my cursor was here, so I'm in that document block, and the table is entered after the document block. The alternative is to put the table above the document block. Well, typically, as you're constructing a worksheet, you're working downwards, and the table below, to me, is the most appropriate place to put it, so I leave it as after the block. Now, you have the option of showing a caption. Now, let's see what happens if we do that. So, here is the dialog. Now, see what happens if I put a caption. See, I get a caption, but I can't edit that caption. I can't do anything with it. I can't change this font. I can't change this color. So I never use that. I'm going to get rid of that. And if I don't, here, insert table. If I don't uncheck this box, Maple will remember and will keep giving me captions. So let's look at this table, and now let's begin to examine some of its features. For one thing, you can use the mouse to change the size of the divider cell. You can grab the end of the cell. Now, there are two ways that you would manipulate the properties of the table. There is when you click in the table, there is a table menu, and you have a certain number of things that you can do from that menu. For instance, you can align the table itself as well as the material in the rows and columns. I'll get to that later. If you want the table centered, you would use this table menu. Now, you also notice here there is an option for table properties. And that's the other way of manipulating a table, and I'm going to bring that up first before I look at the table menu. Look at this table properties. Now, I've done this so often that I know the keyboard shortcuts. It's Alt A, that's for table, P for property. Okay, but anyway, here is this dialog. This is what it comes up, default view. Notice it says table. Now, you could look at Caption, which I am not going to look at because I don't like Maple's table caption properties. I'll put my own captions in. Table size mode. There should be a hyphen one place or the other. Is it table size mode or table size mode? And you have two choices. Fixed percentage of page width or scale with zoom factor. Now, initially, when I first started building worksheets, I used scale with zoom factor, and one oscillated back and forth a bit, and I finally decided to use percentage of page width. And here's the difference. I will demonstrate the difference. The width of the table is governed by this percentage of the page width. So suppose I make that 100%. The table expands back to 100% of the page. Now, if I've got something in this table cell that on this size screen goes to the end of the page and the line does not break, and for some reason or other this document goes to someone whose screen is smaller, then the page will, the line will break because the cell is in a table that is going to be 100% of the width of the page. And this then becomes the width of the page. Now, if you don't want the line to break, if you're visual and you want stuff arranged on the screen with unbroken lines, etc., then you would use the other option, scale with zoom factor. Now that is controlled by the number of points. So suppose I make this greater. Suppose I make this 800 points. The line did not break, but I have to use this slider to see the full line. And so at one point I thought, well, I don't want my lines to break. I want my table to look like I built it. So I'll use that option. Then I got tired of using this slider. You're reading down, and you've got this slider, and you've got to slide over. So I ended up deciding that I would be using primarily fixed percentage. You'll notice that the percentage changed because I changed the number of points. I'll set that back to 100, and my table is restored to the way I had illustrated it. Okay, the next feature is here in the table properties dialog, the screenshot, execution ordering. So you could have content that executes in these cells. So I'm just going to make it very, very simple. I'm going to put a 1, hit the enter key, put a 2, hit the enter key, 3, hit the enter key, 4, hit the enter key. So the order in which I have proceeded is across the row. So this cell might need a result that was computed in this cell, in which case the order across the row matters. So let's look at the table dialog, and let's change from row to by column. Now look at the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now make that selection. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice now we have gone 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm executing in column order, down the column, down this column. Okay, so it depends on what structure your calculations proceed in. So I'm going to restore that because I typically would use row ordering. Now I'm going to talk about these equation labels. Here are the equation labels. You may not want to see them in a table. So if you look at the table properties dialog, there are these 3 checkboxes at the end. And this one down here, show expression labels, you could uncheck to remove the equation labels in that table. Okay, so that is per table. Now there is a global setting for removing equation labels in the worksheet, And I believe that's in the Format menu. Format, Equation Labels, Worksheet. Okay, that, because it's checked, gives you equation labels in the whole worksheet or takes them out of the whole worksheet. Okay, here you are working per table. So let's have something here that will execute here. Okay, we have an equation label. If I wanted to do something with that equation label outside the table, I could check that or uncheck that option, and the equation label in the whole worksheet is gone. So let's restore that. And I'll show you one other label property, this label display. Okay, I've got this worksheet set to flat numeric, which means you start at 1 at the top and every equation label proceeds from there on in increments by 1. If you have this option selected, then it's relative to the section, and you will get an equation label that looks like that, 10.1. I typically run with labels, section labels flat. Now let's bring that back up again. It's in the Format menu, and I have the keyboard shortcuts in my head. Bring that back. I'm going to go back to section numeric, and instead of having numbers, suppose I wanted A, B, C instead of numbers. I'm going to have A, B, C in front of the number, and if I wanted just the ABC, I'd run flat numeric, and the ABC would be written in front of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. So I'm going to restore this to the way I would normally be running, flat numeric. Okay, so equation labels in the table, on, off. Equation labels outside the table, on, off. Now we come to a table property that I believe doesn't work the way it says it should work. And that's caret advance. So let me show you what that would be like. Within the table cell, next executable content. Alright, so within the table cell means that the caret advance, every time you hit the enter key, the caret is going to stay in that cell. And so you'll just generate new document blocks. And you would think that if you selected next executable content, that the caret should advance to your next command or your next input that you've executed. But I can't get that to work, and I've had a discussion with the MapleSoft people, and they think it's the way this was designed, but I can't imagine that they would design these two options that gave you exactly the same result. So let's try next executable content. So here I am at executable content 1. So I hit the enter key. Notice I'm down here. If I hit the enter key again, all I do is I get another document block. I want the cursor to jump across to here. It doesn't do that. I mean, that's what I think that should mean. So unfortunately, this thing to me, the caret advance, is problematic. I don't know what to make of that. Okay, the next item that might matter if you're trying to print your document. And if you want to print your document, what you want to do is you want to go to this print preview. Okay, so here I don't know why they now have this set at 200%. Okay, so here's print preview. So you might be looking at your document, page layout in this print preview. If you're printing or exporting to PDF, then this is the view that you want to look at, because this is what it's going to look like on your printout or in your PDF. So what happens when this table gets down near the bottom of the page? Page break. Now, within the cell, between the cells, or don't break at all. So here is our table, and I never allow a page break within the cell. It just looks terrible. Sometimes you can get away with between the rows. Now, I played around with this the other day, and I put a bunch of blank lines, and then I looked up here at the print preview, and again, you got to keep setting this back to something smaller. Let's look at the next page. Alright, we're just about to push this to the point where it needs a page break. Let's try now. And if you think this is tedious, what I'm doing, well, this is what happens when you're trying to make something visually perfect. Now here, it would appear that the break did not obey my desire to have a complete cell on this page. Let's see, let's look at two pages at the same time, right? The third cell, the third row, is by itself, and you would think that they would put a bounding line across the bottom here. These are the things that can drive you crazy when you're trying to make a document look exactly the way you want it to look. Okay. Let's see, take some of these blank spaces out. So your choices are allow between rows or don't break the table up at all. Now that's okay, but if your table is big and you say, well, don't break this table, then if you either print it or export it to PDF, what's going to happen is you're going to get a lot of blank space, because Maple will say, well, this table does not fit on a page that has one or two rows, one or two lines on it already. It has to fit on a blank page, so you get a lot of blank space, a lot of white space, right? So it's a compromise to make your screen show just exactly what you want. Okay, so the next thing I would like to show you are the effect of those check boxes. Okay, there are these three check boxes. I showed you what this expression label does. These two. So let's here put in a command like plot xx equals 0 to 1. Okay, so I've put in a command and let's execute it, and I now have a graph in that cell. Well, there is a blank line down here which I always take out, and so I have this graph. Now suppose I just want the graph to show and I don't want the command to show. Or suppose the graph is created by a complex collection of plot commands stacked together, which is just visually ugly. So Alt-A-P, bring this up, and I uncheck show the input. Now that's a table-wide command, table-wide option. The plot command is hiding behind this cell. It can be recovered by checking that box in the table property, but it affects the whole table. So here is the way I deal with that issue, that if I want a graph or something to show in a cell and I want the command to be hidden, but I want commands in and inputs in the other cells to persist, then I would put a table inside the table. So I'm going to insert in that table cell a new table, and this will have 2 rows and 1 column. Okay, and I get some blank lines above, which I take out. So here's where I would put the plot command. And let's see what happens if I put it in with red prompts. Okay, because sometimes what happens is I will develop a complex graphic in another worksheet and copy and paste it over, and it's sometimes easier to manage the input lines using 1D input, linear 1D input. So let's just do that simple plot. And execute that. Okay, take out this blank line, and now if I uncheck show input, that applies only to this table, and this is where I typically would put a caption for my figure. There's automatically labeling figures from the plot command, but I prefer doing it myself because then I can give the caption all of the properties that I want to give it much more easily than working through the plot command. And I typically do this. I change the font to Arial. And the reason why I pick Arial is because it's easy to get to. You notice I start at Times, and they're out. The fonts that I have access to are alphabetical. So I hit the A key. At the bottom of this list is Arial. Makes it easy for me to get to. So I select Arial, I make it bold, and then I color it to stand out, and I color it in blue because I only have to move the slider, one slider. Okay, and I make my figure one like that. I use 3 spaces, and then I type my caption. Now, because I used 1D Math, this section boundary shows, or execution group boundary shows. And so that's where this other checkbox comes in. Don't show the execution group boundary. Don't show input. And typically I would have don't show the labels. Right? And this is how I would embed a graph in a table. And over here I would put stuff. And that 2-column format is what so many of these worksheets that I use have. Let's make that bigger. So font control here, section here. This is a table, 1-by-1 table. And I'll show you how to color a cell here in a minute. And I use this 2-column format where I put instructions on the left, and then I do the computation on the right. So on these clickable calculus worksheets that I use for demos, I leave the right side blank because that's where I'm going to work. In the study guides, I've used a similar setup, but I leave in place the result of following the instructions on the right so that the reader simply reads what's there. And if they want to do computations, they could either erase what's in the box or in the cell, or just open a new worksheet. Okay, now there's something else that's going on here, and you see both color and you see a merged pair of cells. So let me go back here to this table that I'm beating up on for illustration purposes, and let's add a row. To do that, I use table, insert, row, and I would have to go, I'll do it below, right? So you see you can insert another column. It's inserted to the left of where I was. Control Z to undo that. Insert column to the right, row above, row below. And I'll come back to this paragraph thing, which I never use, but I will explain it to you because it's tricky. Anyways, so I've inserted this row. Now I select the 2 cells that I want to merge. Table, merge cells. So now this is one single cell. It's different from grouping. A grouping does not merge the cell, it just has to do with what is displayed with respect to the boundaries. And then to color that cell, table, cell color. Then you pick out a color. OK, and you have colored that, and that's where I would put, let's take that color out. This is where I would put the caption. I would put table whatever, and I would do this myself because I have more control over what this thing is going to look like. And then I would put whatever I'm going to put there. So now let's look at some more of these options in the table menu. So we have alignment, and I've showed how you could align the table. Typically you center the table. Okay. Material in the column. Table alignment. You want to left justify everything in the column. So forth. Row alignment, you have a little bit more control here. You can move everything to the top. Center or bottom, or the baseline of the row. So let's see what happens when we move to the bottom. Well, it's not doing much in this configuration. How about we stick in a fresh table? Let's just throw in a fresh table. Let's put some stuff in here. Let's put an integral in here. So I'm going to put a definite integral. 0 tab 1 tab sine x tab x. Alright. Now let's say on this side I had some text. If I could spell. Okay, now I might want this to line up with that, and so the alignment for the row would be to center everything. Okay? And in some instances, the alignment looks better if you pick baseline, which is the baseline of the item on the right, but here the baseline is the center, so that's not going to change anything. Okay, so that's what these options here let you do. It makes things within these cells line up better. Okay, so there's alignment. We've talked about insert, and now I'm going to talk about paragraph, which I avoid. So let's put paragraph before the table. And something has happened right here. And to see what has happened, you need to be sure that you have your marker column visible, because each pair of these opposing triangles delineates what's called a document block. And that's where you can put stuff. Now look right here where we did this paragraph thing. You'll notice that this is not a pair of opposing triangles. This is not a document block. So that's why I always tell people to run with this marker column selected so that you can see where you can put stuff and not put stuff. So you can type here. That was supposed to say text. And you can even put 2D math. So you could stick an integral there. But you can't evaluate anything there because it's not a document block. And in fact, if you right click on that, you do not get the option to execute in line, right? Doing right here, control equal does not execute that stuff. So paragraph is like a dead zone, and if you mistakenly stick in a paragraph in your work and think that you can do stuff in there, and then you find you can't, it's upsetting. So there might be times when you want that paragraph structure where things don't execute and when you type maybe text. But you can, I'm going to remove that. How do you do that? There. Control delete. But you could do that by just going to, it's a document block, but then you just type text. Okay? So I never use that paragraph thing. If you find that you're in a paragraph, you would at least know what has happened to you. Now, if we go back to the table that we began with, that I have differential calculus material stored in, these examples, you'll see in this table, these are hyperlinks. So when I clicked on this hyperlink, it took me to this worksheet. How do you do a hyperlink? Well, if you right-click on the hyperlink, you'll see Hyperlink Properties. So here's a dialog that lets you set the hyperlink properties. Well, I have hyperlinked here to a worksheet, but you could hyperlink to other things. A URL, which would take you to a web page. You can hyperlink to an email message, which I've never done. You can hyperlink to a help page, which I do frequently. I hyperlink to help pages. If I mention a command and I want the help page for that command, I'll hyperlink to that page. Task template, you can hyperlink to a task template, and what opens is the help page for that task template. There's a built-in math dictionary. You can hyperlink to items in the math dictionary. You can hyperlink to Maplets, but Maplets are on their way out. The embedded component seems to be the preferred way, so I don't write Maplets. I've used some, so I don't hyperlink to Maplets any place. And then the workbook, you hyperlink to something in the workbook. Well, we don't have to talk about what is the workbook. It's a big container that you can put worksheets and graphics files and all other kind of stuff, PDFs and so on. And here is where you would hyperlink to the items in that basket called the workbook. If you are hyperlinking to, for example, a worksheet, and you want that to open in a specific place, bookmark that place, and then put the name of that bookmark here, and so that when the hyperlink is clicked, not only will that page open, but it will open at the bookmark. And I do that frequently in the study guides, where I read lots of cross-referencing, where you don't want to reproduce a table or something that definition or something that you've done in an earlier worksheet. And so you hyperlink to the worksheet and you put the bookmark, and when you click the hyperlink, you get to that page opened already at the bookmark. And then this absolute versus relative path. If you choose the absolute path, then it's the path on your computer, starting from the C drive all the way down to wherever you have the items stored. If you send that stuff, that worksheet with that hyperlink, to somebody else, that path is meaningless on their computer. So what you want is to, in that case, is to have the path be relative. And so it's relative to where you are at. So it's relative to where it is within the folders that you have your stuff in. And the easiest way to get the path correct is to use the browse. So use the browse. You browse through the spot you want. It's then the relative path within the framework of the folders that you have set up. And if you send it to somebody else, send it. So you send that collection of folders to somebody else, and they open up, then the hyperlinks will work exactly as they worked on your computer. So what are some of the other characteristics that I make use of? I guess you can see that in here. Bullet points. Okay, so how do you put a bullet point in? You use this icon in the toolbar, right? You put bullet points. I used to use the numbers, but then it got too hard to manage the numbers. If you want to change a cell, you want to move, you want to edit something, and then you got to worry about what did I do with my numbers. So I just find that just bullet pointing each item just makes things stand out and makes it more readable. Now you'll notice here there's a bullet point and then there's a line below, and so how do you do that? Let's put in something, and under that I guess we should make that text. We'll make that text. We want to bullet point that. So there's the bullet point. Now I want to put something below it. So Shift Enter, Shift Enter, Shift Enter. Okay? So you can then put spaces in there either by do Shift Enter, or sometimes it's easier to do this. You hit the Enter key, you're going to get another bullet point. Just go over here and take the bullet point away, and now you're back to normal, and you can go down and you can space downwards, and you can put something else in there and bullet point that, and then you have this gap in between the way you see here. And as we get this far along, I think you get the impression that I'm very visual. There's only so much real estate, and the idea is to make the screen as rich in information as you can, but to arrange things in such a way that visually it's pleasing and the eye can pick out the important stuff easily. That's the way I wrote my notes for my students. That's the way I think. That's the way I write notes for myself. And I think that's an important characteristic of material that you're going to present. My AEM book is the worksheets are the old worksheets where you start at the top and you scroll down, keep scrolling and keep scrolling. It's not any, in my mind, with hindsight, an efficient use of screen real estate, but there was nothing I could do about it at the time that stuff was written. And I keep thinking in retirement here of ways that that whole AEM product can be updated. Now there's another feature of some of my worksheets that I'd like to illustrate here. Let me make this a bit bigger. It's a problem on strain optimization. You're trying to put a rectangle under the upper half of an ellipse. And in this visualization, I have an animation where the slider controls the rectangle, the size of the rectangle, and then I've written here the x coordinate of the right edge, and here I've written the area of this resulting rectangle. So the animation shows what it is that this problem is all about. You're trying to maximize the area. Okay, so how is this done? Well, it's done with embedded components. So you use this palette, components. You can install a button. You can install, this thing is a graph region, plot region, and then you tell the button what you want it to do when it's clicked. And so here it's already been programmed, and the way you see the code is to right click and pick click or edit click action, edit click action. Okay, so it says use these packages. So document tools is what runs the components. Then I've got plots and plot tools, and here is the code that I've used to make that animation. Variables that you would define here would be global, which means that you could break any of these names by assigning to that name outside the animation. And so here is a device that I was taught to use as one way of protecting those definitions made for the animation, is to build a module. So module, end module. And within the module you can declare locals. And so here I've declared these variables as local, and that is local to this module. So using an H or a P1 or whatever outside this animation won't break the animation. And if you want to just open up any of these things that you, and look behind the buttons and the components, You can see what the coding is. You code this visualization in the document in a section. That's just another technique that I've used. Now, my style is something that I developed, unique to me. It's not the only style that you can have. And here I'm going to close this section. You can see why I like to have that section boundary available so that I can close things up easily. All right. So let me show you two other styles. One of the styles you can see in a built-in worksheet. It's a help page, and I get to it by executing question mark for help. It's called applications, and the particular application is vehicle ride. So I just rummaged around and decided I would bring this page up. So this is a style, and you should now be able to visualize or recognize some of the features that I've talked about. For example, this is a component, and if you right click on it and you ask for component properties, it will tell you it is a text area component. And so here are a bunch of components, and they seem to be distributed nicely on the page. Now if you very slowly scroll across, see that double arrow? That's telling you that there is a hidden table right there. And if you do the same down here, you see there's another table boundary hiding down here. So we know how to make tables visible. Let's go to show hide content. You notice hidden table borders have been unchecked. Now if I hover, I see the table boundaries. See? So a table was used to position these items, and a table was used to position these items, and these two tables are positioned within a bigger table. So let's see if we can get that bigger table to become visible. Hidden table borders. Well, that should become visible for this table. Yes. No. Yes, you can see it. There it is. You can see the big table that's containing these two little tables. Okay? So the table properties that we talked about earlier were used to set up the structure here. Okay? A cell was cell colored. You maybe merge cell. So it's no mystery. All right, now there is another style I'm going to show you, and I call it Samir's style. Now Samir is Samir Khan, K-H-A-N, one of our one of the MapleSoft programmers, developers, very bright guy, and you'll see his picture here momentarily. Here is the style that he created for this particular worksheet. You click these pluses and they become minuses instead of having triangles. And then he uses commands. Now he types his commands in Typeset Math, but it's at a red prompt. Okay? And he colors, I mean this is a cell here, and he colors that cell. Okay, so that's the style. A quick look at the style. This is where he described it. It is a blog post in Maple Primes. So that's a hyperlink to, let's see, a hyperlink to a URL. And there's a picture of Samir. And here in this blog post, he talks about this style, and then this YouTube video is him explaining it. If I click on that link, it brings up the YouTube. Okay. What you would probably want to know is, what is this link? So right click, Hyperlink Properties. That's the link. Let me put that here for you. Okay, so if you wanted to get back to that Primes post, from which you can then get to the YouTube video, you would need this link. So if you leave this screen on the screen long enough, you might be able to write that down and retype it. Or if you send me an email, how could you send me an email? You could send me an email to Lopez at maplesoft.com and say, hey, could you just put that link into an email for me so I don't have to figure out how to get there? We can do that.